Get ready, take your seat. Cyber Week 2023 is about to begin.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for organizing the Cyber Week event. I'm thrilled to have you here with us, and especially in such a competitive day. There are so many other panels at the same time, so you must be at the right place for you. My name is Shlomit Wagman. I'm the former head of the Israeli Anti-Money Laundering and Terrorism Financing Prohibition Authority. Currently, I'm at Harvard University, and I'm very happy to open this session in which we're on targeting the ransomware kill chain. We have a packed agenda today with 3 different panels and a couple of keynote speakers. And we'll start with our first opening lecture of the day with Omer Grossman, Chief Information Officer at CyberArk. Omer just completed his military service in the Israeli Defense Force for more than 25 years. Currently, he leads the CyberArk Global Information Technology Group. At the IDF, he served as at the Cyber Defense Operations Center. In this role, he led joint and national cyber defense campaign and operations. Omer also serves as the head of the Center for Computing and Information System, Mamram in Hebrew, the general cloud service provider of the IDF, providing data and infrastructure services to all military branches, including the general staff. Omer holds a bachelor degree in physics and electrical engineering from Tel Aviv University and a Master of Science in Government Information Leadership from the National Defense University College of Information and Cyberspace in Washington, D.C. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you. Please come.
Thank you all. As Shlomit introduced me, I'm Omer Grossman. I'm honored to be here to open this incredible event focused on the ransomware kill chain. Over the next several hours, you'll hear from some of the most experienced and most talented industry professionals who have dedicated their careers to developing and nurturing essential frameworks, best practices, and partnerships that are focused on targeting the ransomware threats. To kick this session off, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, a little bit of background about me, and my connection to this topic and this community dear and near to my heart. I recently joined CyberArk, as Shlomit mentioned, after 25 years with the Israeli Defense Forces. Up until last year, I was still in my uniform. My most leadership position, as Shlomit mentioned, were the head of the biggest cloud service provider unit in the military, and as the head of operation in the cyber defense division, I was essentially the IDF CISO. With my military experience, I have a good perspective on what it takes to be a world-class defender against increasingly targeted and dangerous cyber threats. And as I contemplated my career outside the military, I was drawn to CyberArk, not only for the company's reputation in the cybersecurity market, but I truly believe that identity security is the future. I think identity is the new attack surface. CyberArk's commitment to identity security innovation and helping customers defend against cyber attackers' innovations is a major reason why I joined the company eventually. Aligned with these topics and the topic that will be discussed today, as I see it, we have 3 main missions in cybersecurity. And if we resolve all 3 of them, we might have a real chance to fix cyberspace. The first one is filling the holes in the laws and norms regarding cyberspace, cybercrime, and especially cyber warfare. The second one is to be able to find technical solutions to make vulnerability patching and the burden of vulnerability patching a thing of the past. We must eradicate one day. And in the world where trust is the most important thing, our third mission is being able to implement identity security principle based on the zero trust approach. Now, I'd like to share with you a short story that parallels today's threat environment. Once upon a time, like any good story should start, In an era when pirates ruled the seas, a notorious band of raiders struck fears into the hearts of sailors and merchants alike. The pirates' modus operandi was simple yet effective. They would ambush unsuspected vessels, overpower the crews, loot everything of value, and often capture hostages and hold them for ransom. In the face of these threats, a coalition was formed to restore the order to the seas. The coalition launched coordinated operations, patrolling trade routes, and establishing fortified harbors. They improved ship designs, enhancing speed and firepower to outmaneuver and overpower the pirate vessels. Skilled sailors were recruited, trained, and armed with the latest weaponry, ready to defend against any pirate incursion. The pirates, however, were not ones to surrender easily. They evolved their tactics and grew more menacing. The ransom demands became increasingly outrageous. The relentless pursuit of wealth by the pirates mirrored a more contemporary phenomenon that would emerge centuries later. Of course, I'm talking about the ransomware cyber attacks. In the modern age, instead of ships and swords, hackers armed themselves with advanced technology and intricate knowledge of computer systems. They infiltrate networks, encrypt vital data, and hold it hostage until the victim pay exorbitant amount of ransomware in cryptocurrency. Just as the pirates sought to profit from the vulnerabilities of the maritime world, these cybercriminals capitalized on the weaknesses of the digital infrastructure. The parallels are uncanny. The pirates' ransomware demanded tangible wealth, whereas the ransomware attacker seeks virtual riches. In the military, we used to say, train hard and the fight will be easy. Trust me, it might be the only sentence in Hebrew that sounds better in Hebrew than in English. That philosophy applies to how organizations can mitigate impacts of attacks like those stemming from ransomware. A major story the past several weeks focuses on the efforts of the Klopp ransomware gang that is claiming responsibility for exploiting one of several vulnerabilities in the Move It file transfer software, causing significant software supply chain risks that could impact hundreds of organizations, if not more. Many organizations have come forward as victims of extortion attempts by Klopp, but we haven't yet seen any reports of ransom demands. It's possible we are just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Regardless of if and when that happens in this case, what is clear is that ransomware is the most prominent threat today. Last year, ransomware attacks led to losses of billions of dollars. Its effects can be wide-ranging, from inconveniences like transfers being blocked, to life-threatening incidents affecting major healthcare providers. According to recent research by CyberArk, nearly 9 in 10, I repeat, 9 in 10 of the global organizations surveyed experienced ransomware attack in the past year. It's an increase from 7 in 10 from a year before. And 60% of affecting paying attackers twice or more times to allow recovery. That signals that they were probably victims of double extortion campaigns. Now, I'm excited to hear from our law enforcement and cybercrime panelists today about advancements in defensive techniques in the ransomware area. Today, governments, law enforcement agencies, cybersecurity experts, and tech companies must join forces, as the coalition did hundreds of years ago, to protect individuals and organizations from this ever-present threat, technology advancements to develop robust countermeasures to deter and apprehend cybercriminals. Over time, hundreds of years ago, the coalition's efforts were successful. The pirate threat was gradually contained, and trade routes once again became safer. And just as the maritime world banded together to quell the pirate threat, today's digital realm requires a united front to safeguard our interconnected world from the perils of ransomware attacks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Omer Grossman, and everyone who's at the back, you have a minute if you want to come over and sit, take your seat. We'll move to the panels. Thank you to the Israeli Cyber Directorate for organizing the entire day. And without further ado, I would like to ask the members of the first panel on floor to sit here with us. Take your seat. Clegg, Vice President of Crypto Investigation at Cybertrace, Rahav Shalom Revivo, the Head of Financial Cyber Innovation and International Engagement at the Ministry of Finance, and Liat Kilner, the Head of Enforcement Department, the Privacy Protection Authority. And I'll join them in a minute. Please note that this is the only female-only panel on Cyber Week. And we were actually supposed to have another amazing woman with us, but unfortunately she's sick from the head of the Cyber Directorate in the Israeli police, but still the only panel with so many females.
Kudos Shlomit for making this happen.
Wow, amazing.
Great. Women on cyber space. Okay, until I put my mic on, perhaps could you start with a short introduction of each one of you?
Yeah, sure. I don't think this works. I'll try one of these.
It's supposed to be one for each.
Turn it on.
1, 2, 3. No. 1? Yeah.
Yeah, hey, yours works.
Try this
Oh, hey, there we go. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes? Awesome. I'll just stick with this one. So, yes, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this awesome female panel. Pamela Clegg, Vice President, Crypto Investigations and Risk. So I work for CipherTrace. We were acquired by MasterCard almost 2 years ago now. So we're a blockchain analytics tracing company, provide intelligence both on-chain and off-chain. So I come into the conversation when we talk about the payments. So not the cyber security that happens or didn't happen before the ransomware attack. But when we talk about payments, I'll happily join in.
I'm Liat Kilner, Chief Superintendent in the Israeli Police, now in the Ministry of Justice, Head of Enforcement in the PPA, Privacy Protection Authority of Israel.
So, hi everyone, my name is Rahav Shalom Revivo. I'm from the Israeli Ministry of Finance, in which I've established and I'm leading the financial cyber innovation and international engagement. Prior to the work in the ministry, I'm coming from the private sector in various senior R&D roles. And I'm also very much into women empowerment in a community that I've established with friends of fintech ladies in Israel. So anyone from the fintech industry here is most welcome to join us.
Yeah. As a proud member of this forum, thank you so much, Rav, for establishing that. In this panel, we're going to actually speak about ransomware as a financial crime. And, you know, in most of those Cyber Week panels, we speak about crisis management, cyber, the technological aspects, but now we're actually trying to follow the criminal aspects of it and the financial trail as part of it. I can share that as the head of the Israeli anti-money laundering, and actually at some point also the head of the Privacy Protection Authority, we ran into cryptocurrencies, thinking about was 2014, and we were shocked. We're like, oh my God, this is such a terrible thing that is going on. We don't know what to do with that. And immediately we did what regulators do when they don't know enough about something, and that's warning the public. Be aware, there is something weird going on here. It's probably going to be used by criminals, and there's nothing good in that. But then it took us some time and realized that there's something else here, that there are also legitimate reasons for the blockchain technology, and that there are very actually good use cases of that, and this is financial innovation, and actually we support that, but we still need to find ways to mitigate the risks. Then we changed our approach, as well as the entire global community, led by the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. And we decided as a global community to impose standards and rules on cryptocurrencies, on blockchain technologies, and actually treat that like any other financial means. Namely, we try to identify relevant financial intermediaries that will be able to have a look at this environment and report the government when something goes wrong there, the AML-CFT rules, anti-money laundering, counterterrorism financing rules, and we start following the money over that space. And surprisingly, we've seen that it was quite successful because unlike cash, which is, it's very hard to trace, here everything is digitalized. Basically, there is a trail that if you're able to actually read the trail and follow that, you could get to some interesting places, and we'll hear about those places in a minute. And then another phenomena that happened, or trend, is that ransomware started to flourishing in the digital environment. No more robbing a bank, because you don't need to do that anymore. You're doing that in cyberspace. But hey, you can actually follow the money and try to follow the ransomware as any other money laundering or terrorism financing investigation. So that's the approach of actually targeting those aspects. And we'll start discussing some backgrounds and better understand. Pamela, perhaps we'll start with you, sharing with us which trends do you see in this environment? What are the risks that are associated with ransomware, and anything that you could share? Because, basically you see many typologies.
Yeah, so 2021 was a banner year. I think everybody remembers. And honestly, that was probably the last time that I spoke on a panel about ransomware. So 2022 was pretty quiet, relatively speaking. 2021, we hit a lot of, all-time highs for just number of attacks, amount of per payment, number of victims, actual payments made. That was also the year that we saw within the United States that the Office of Asset Control, so OFAC, the ones that in the U.S. Department of Treasury that sets our sanctions, they came out and actually said any ransomware victim that makes a ransomware payment to an entity that is sanctioned will also be hit with the sanctions violation. So if, say, I was a bank and I was, had a ransomware attack from back in the old days, WannaCry, for example, which we know were North Korean operatives, then if I paid WannaCry, then I could also sanctions violation for making that payment. So that was also pretty important. It is one of the reasons that they do attribute that we did see a decrease in payments made in 2022. But we just saw a kind of a slow year in 2022, again, relative to 2021. However, don't fear, guys. You have job security. In March of this year, it was a banner month. So we definitely saw, and that was, and I think Omar already mentioned CLOP, right? So we saw them come out and made March a really banner year. It was actually double what it was the year before in ransomware attacks. As far as payments go, we continue to see Bitcoin dominate. That is going to be followed, and we'll get into this as we get into the panel, by different ways to obfuscate the trail of funds that they're going to use. And then we continue to see ransomware as a service. And we even see that, again, I'm not on the actual deployment side of the cybersecurity side, but we see that even in the payments. So when the payment's made, we'll actually see the payment going out to the operators and then the guys who are actually the boots on the ground out there doing the door knocking and getting the malware into the company. So we see those payments split. It's still about 80 to 20, 85 to 15%, more or less. And the takedowns that happened in 2022 tended to be more your boots on the ground guys. This still wasn't the big operations groups. And then we saw some exchanges get taken down because of their willingness to accept ransomware tainted funds. So.
That's very interesting. So we're seeing a growing trend, and we also know that there are growing trends at law enforcement community to try and actually investigate those activities. So Liat, we'll get to you as a law enforcement representative here in the panel. Before we'll get to all the privacy concerns about ransomware, which we'll dig in a minute, what are the major challenges that you are facing as a law enforcement enforcement authority in trying to investigate ransomware?
Okay, so I love the pirate analogy because it demonstrates really well the challenges in attacking ransomware and dealing with ransomware. There are multiple challenges, but I will regard the two major problems. First of all, the main object of law enforcement is collecting evidence and prosecuting, which is very challenging in the world of ransomware, since the global nature of
it's working. Just hold it closer.
The global nature of ransomware, where multiple jurisdictions are combined and relevant, and the fact that it's cyber, which requires law authorities for special capabilities. It's not like you go to a police station in Israel and you will file a complaint about the ransomware. It is a problem. So this is from the law enforcement. From the other end, as a result, in the last few years, we saw that we tried to start initiatives that were focused on prevention. For example, the No More Ransom initiative that combined law enforcement authorities with private sector and trying to offer to the victims decryption keys to those attacks. And this is actually, it seems like a good idea. In fact, it's like a rat chase, because it doesn't really, you have a key, decryption key in one hand, they will find something else. So it doesn't really solve the issue. This is a multidisciplinary war, which requires joint forces, and actually, like money laundering, like pedophilia, like a lot of things that happens in the cyber world, we need to join forces. We need a global task force that will fight this thing together. We need to map infrastructure platforms that enables the attacks to happen. And you don't necessarily, and on the other hand, the fact that victims, the companies, individuals, don't see the law enforcement as a key solution. They don't expect law enforcement to do anything. Ransomware attacks are under-reported. Nobody reports them, even though under Israeli law and under different laws, you have to report, at least when it comes to private data breaches, you need to report them. Nobody really, there is under reporting, because, as I said, victims don't expect law enforcement to really prosecute and do anything. So here in Israel, as far as private information, personal data, we did change the way the PPA operates in the last year. We do, I will come to it later on, but we are intervening, and we do expect companies to report, even though this is the last thing a company wants to do while being attacked. We are trying to receive the indicators, the artifact that will allow us in the future. This is a long-term investigation. This is not something you do in one case, but all this information, all this mapping of the infrastructures and platforms that enable ransomware attack groups to operate, we need globally in a joint task force, like in the pirate analogy, we need to work together in order to eventually not prevent 100%, but at least make their life harder. Speaking of prevention, of course, as the regulator of private data protection, we do the problem with ransomware and cyber attacks on personal data is once the damage had occurred, this is like you can't really turn the wheel back. It happened if the data was leaked, published, sold. It's not going to be erased. You can erase it on one platform, it will resurface in a different platform. So we are more focused on prevention, which means that we are now building better intelligence platform that will enable us to be there before the damage had occurred, and using our administrative regulatory capabilities, force companies in different sectors to be more compliant to the law and regulation. And again, this is not a 100% proof defense strategy, but it does put or requires hackers to put more efforts. And we don't want their life to be very easy. We want them to work harder, and we want our companies to be better saved.
Thank you. Thank you so much for elaborating on that. And I was actually curious. I mean, in order to trace what happens at the on blockchain environment, there's a lot of data that may be available and may not be available. Can you perhaps elaborate on some of the options that are available for law enforcement counterparts when they want to collaborate and investigate? As was heard, there are so many information gaps because there are not many complaints that are being filed. So what can law enforcement do?
Yeah, it definitely takes public and private sector cooperation. I would say right now the public and private sector cooperation that we see with regard to ransomware is more centralized to each specific jurisdiction, so which country, but we don't yet see the global coordination, which is certainly going to be required. You have to involve the blockchain analytics tools, and you have to involve the actual insurance companies or the, like the coverwares and the firms that are actually going to help their customers make the payments. Because again, because of the underreporting to law enforcement and to government doesn't see a lot of the actual payments, so the actual address to where the payment is sent, and then they get a lot of the information about the attack itself. So that stays in the private sector. So the coordination is imperative between the two. And then also too with the blockchain analytics companies, right? We're not the only game in town. There's lots of us out there. So in order for every exchange that is out there looking at funds coming into their platform, regardless of what tool they use, they need to be able to know if those funds are tainted, are actual ransomware tainted funds. In order for that to take place, all the blockchain analytics tools have to have access to the ransomware data so that we're all able to label that information. Otherwise, right now, it's still very hit and miss. We may have information as to this, particular Bitcoin or Ethereum address that is ransomware. Our competitors might have something on a different address, and then another competitor might have a different address. So it's very spotty as far as coverage. So that coordination of information is really important.
Can you describe for the audience, how does it look like when you're tracing data on the blockchain? Which insights can you achieve when you're trying to bet bad guys?
So again, it depends on what particular blockchain they're using. So it's still mostly a lot of Bitcoin. We have seen ransomware payments on the Ethereum protocol as well. If they're going through Ethereum, they're most likely going to run it through Tornado Cash, which is a type of mixer and obfuscation tool that is on the Ethereum protocol. Tornado Cash was sanctioned by the US government not too long ago due to it have laundered funds for North Korean cyber criminals. And then if it's going through Bitcoin, we're going to see it run through a host of different techniques, whether that's mixers, whether that's coin joins, whether that's just plain centralized exchanges that don't coordinate with law enforcement. The best mixer of all is a big exchange that doesn't talk to law enforcement. Then it's impossible for us to go in and find your funds and figure out, did you take your Bitcoin in? Did you, are you holding it there? Did you swap, I don't know, some random coin like Doge or something else? Like, what happened inside the exchange? Nobody can see inside the exchange because that's all off-chain, so that's all internal. So those are really the best ways. And then also too, on the darknet, the centralized markets, the darknet markets that are centralized are other good ways to your funds, very centralized as well.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I can actually testify firsthand as a former investigator. The Israeli anti-money laundering was able to use those blockchain analytics to trace funds. And for example, in one of the ransomware cases, which was an attack on a major critical infrastructure in Israel, we used blockchain analytics and actually tried to see where the funds are going. The preliminary exchange of frictions of Bitcoin with the hackers, with the attackers, when you just want to make sure that they do have the access to data and so forth, and we also wanted more time to investigate that, we followed the funds and we realized that the crypto, after many layering and many different paths that he took, was actually cashed out in an exchange shop in Tehran, Iran. So within the Israeli context, it became kind of clear that this case is most likely not a mere criminal motive, but it was actually terror attack, something with different motive, and he changed the entire concept in which law enforcement approach that case just by following the money. And by the way, you could also develop a practice know your attacker, because each attacker has its own paradigm, the way that they are trying to launder the funds and they want to actually use them at the end of the day. And this is why it's actually a financial investigation, because each one of them has a different pattern in the way that they are trying to spread the funds along the blockchain not to be discovered, and to be able to layer them in a way that they will be able to use them later on. So in order to do that, of course, you must have a very strong international operation between different units worldwide, because it doesn't have any limits, ransomware and crypto, and domestically, and also develop those capabilities, as we just heard. Rav, I would like to approach you and actually ask you, from your point of view as a Ministry of Finance, about the international collaborations, and how do you actually create that and orchestrate all those?
So, as you mentioned, ransomware, crypto do not have any boundaries. And we are all facing the same challenges together by similar, if not the same, attack groups with similar techniques. And information sharing and collaboration, not only in the domestic level, which is crucial, but also in the international level became crucial. We cannot overcome an attacker alone. One of the things that I really like, which is a quote, is like, it takes a network to defeat a network. And when you're facing that asynchronous scenario where your effort is very much smaller, much bigger than the attacker's effort, and when you have a scenario where the same attack groups are attacking different states, you need to collaborate together. So within the Ministry of Finance, and more specifically within the financial cyber activities of the Ministry of Finance, meaning cybersecurity protection and support of the protection to the financial system, maintaining the resilience and stability of the financial ecosystem, we have several levels of international collaboration. The first one, the most, I would say, practical one, is a financial CERT forum that we have established. CERT stands for a Computer Emergency Response Team. It's like a national cyber center that provides support and help to the financial institutions for the financial CERT. So we have established a financial CERT forum with other mature financial CERTs in the Nordic financial CERT, the Italian one, the Switzerland's one, and we are sharing it on an ongoing basis, whether these are ongoing meetings that we have in our calendars to exchange methodologies and the ideas and challenges, or whether it is threats that we're facing and we're sharing information together. Another level of collaboration is the bilateral one between ministries of finance or treasuries in different countries. And I can give an example of the collaboration that we have between the Israeli Ministry of Finance and the US Treasury, a valued and strong collaboration and relationship. We have an agreement between the two ministries to share information and strategies regarding financial cyber. We have executed a bilateral exercise, meaning we're facing incidents that are influencing both countries. How can we collaborate together? How can we mitigate that? And we also have an ongoing relationship sharing information and sharing methods we are working. The last, which is, you know, like the biggest phase within that stairwell is the multilateral coalition, in which the Israeli Ministry of Finance has led to multilateral, meaning many countries, simulation, which is a financial cyber, meaning we have brought together to one table 10 finance ministries, including US Treasury, UK Treasury, which were an observer, Germany, Italy, Switzerland, UAE, Thailand, various finance ministries, Austrian one, and on top of that, global financial organizations, organizations that their activity in the financial ecosystem is crucial. Among them is the International Monetary Fund, the BIS, which is like a central bank to central banks, World Bank, IDB, and we collaborated together how to overcome and what kind of information can we share when we are facing together a financial cyber crisis or a financial crisis from a cyber attack on the financial ecosystem. And we brought to the table not the cyber specialists. The scenario was very detailed, very technical. It was clear which entities are so-called attacked and so on. But the discussion on the table was between the financial leadership of the countries, speaking financial implications and financial impact and how can we overcome them together and mitigate them together.
Thank you so much, Rahav. I have to confess, I'm so curious, you know, just to be a fly on the wall and have a hint. It must be classified, but could you share with us some examples of which cases you are actually doing in those exercises? And
okay, so even if not in exercises, okay, speaking about ransomware, sometimes you need information to better understand of what would be that APT, that attack group, next step. Take, for example, a ransomware attack, which was a two-phase approach. It was a small payload of DDoS attack, where it didn't harm too much the banks or the financial organization website, and they threatened that if we do not pay, or if the financial institution do not pay a specific amount of money, in Bitcoin of course, then they will attack in a much bigger payload. So just to bring from our counterpart, you know, whether they've seen that attack method, did the attacker reach that second phase? No, they didn't, okay, in other countries. That was crucial, because it gave our customers, our financial institutions in the domestic ecosystem, the understanding of what might be expected as a later phase. In the global, in the multilateral exercises, in the global exercises that we have executed, ransomware was, of course, one of the scenarios that was used. Just imagine a ransomware attack that encrypts the entire all of the systems of GSIP, of the global important systemic bank that can influence us all. Or, for example, a manipulation campaign. We saw that with the SVB. We don't need really an attack. It's enough to pollute the social networks with information that something is not working, that a bank is running low on cash, and then there is run on bank. So it can be a perspective, all unfortunately very, very realistic.
thank you. That's very interesting. And if I'll speak a little bit from my experience about international cooperation, we also find out that a very important tool is actually to share information and data. For example, once we identified that a terror organization is doing fundraising with cryptocurrencies, for example, the Israeli government decided to designate that particular wallet, I mean the address that was given to provide the donations to, and additional related wallets. And what we found out is that it has an amazing effect, because all of a sudden many other countries checked whether they have information about that. And we've also seen many private sector entities that started to check the data and found so many activities out there that were related to those wallets. Ransomware attack or donation campaign, it's the same technique. And then we were able to actually almost immediately to seize and confiscate millions of dollars by doing that. And by the way, Hamas recently announced a month and a half ago that it doesn't going to solicit for via crypto anymore because of the network effect, because his donors, people who donated to Hamas via those crypto, were identified, and the reverse engineering actually revealed their identities, and they were not able to conduct other type of businesses in the crypto environment. Which is a very good chilling effect, which we wanted to achieve as a government. And then, I mean, I want to ask actually Yupa, how do you see that from the private sector perspective? I mean, once law enforcement are coordinating and sharing information and spreading out, the results of their investigations, where do you take it from that point on, and what happens then?
Yeah, so that's where we start to build out pattern analysis. It's just like any other criminal organization. The ransomware operators usually aren't great at laundering their funds in the beginning. It takes time and practice to be able to be better at that. And then at some point, they'll generally make some mistake. So the more information we can get about all the payments to a particular ransomware group, like let's just take Lockbit, which is still around, right? So the more information we can get and the further back we can get those payments for Lockbit, then we can really start to identify patterns in how that they to launder money, right? Once they find a way that they like to launder, they usually stick with that. But again, back in the early days, we can find errors. We can find when they made mistakes, when they, almost all of their money through a particular mixer, but they missed a little piece of it down here, and we can continue to trace that. Or they sent in amounts that were too big to the mixers, so we can actually see those converging on the other side of the mixers, depending on which particular one they're using. So there's lots of different ways that we can build that pattern analysis for those payments and identify where they're taking their funds, right? How are they cashing out? We know that with some of the operators out of Korea, they actually used peer-to-peer exchanges. So those were pretty prevalent, and then that actually came into a lot of the traditional financial system. So that bled over into TradFi, into traditional finance. And then in addition, they'll tend to pick some of the smaller exchanges on the periphery of our nation that a lot of our non-state actors like to work out of. So we'll actually see them pick those exchanges and launder their funds through those exchanges. So then you can, and we have seen, multinational cooperation to take down those exchanges that are accepting those funds and are not doing what they're supposed to, which is freeze funds, report funds, allow for law enforcement cooperation.
Thank you. So, I mean, going back perhaps to privacy concerns, Liat, you started to elaborate earlier about the risks for privacy, but I was wondering, if you could elaborate a bit about that a little bit more, and also which sanctions or actions the Privacy Protection Authority has. You can have, there's another mic here, you can like that. There are some, you mentioned reporting requirements to your authority, what they are included, and which action you may take to combat the phenomena.
Okay, so as we started talking about, and Tamara mentioned, it requires a lot of information, and this is like moving from the tactical field to the strategic field. Which means that, as I mentioned before, first of all, prevention. As we said, once data was breached, leaked, enciphered, the damage already happened, and it's one-way ticket. You can't really go back on that. We want to be in the steps ahead. So a lot of information coming to Israeli police, to PPA, about organizations which are not compliant to law and regulations in order to build higher walls against these. So this is phase one. Phase two, for moving to the strategic level, is to be where you are relevant. And this is tricky. Why? Because nobody, as a regulator or law enforcement authority, wants you in stages, because the organization, for sure, wants to recover from the attack. The last thing on their mind is to report the breach now regulator, which we understand. That's why we change our policy. Now we require immediate reporting, not to spike, and not to, because this is really the phase where we are most needed, and we won't harm the company's efforts to recover. But it's important that as a regulator we'll be stages from three main reasons. First of all, we see the event in its complexity. We want the company to recover. We won't stand on the first days of the attack and start examining what the companies as to compliance the day before the attack. We won't do that. We only are examining three things. First of all, a lot of times during the recovery process, a lot of information which is crucial, essential, and required be used in the long terms is deleted from various reasons. It is vital for us to be in that stages and to say, listen, this is the information we will require at the end of the recovery process. Please make sure that this information is kept. We are in terms of forensics, we will prepare information regarding cryptocurrency, wallets, of course indicators, artifacts that are important in the long run war and in the global point of view to battle these attacks. So this is very important. The other thing is, as a privacy protection authority, in the complexity of dealing with the event, it's important to see also the data subject rights in this episode. Of course, it is important to analyze the risk that the organization is facing. A lot of times, resilience and recovery is very important, but not on expense of risking the data. So it is important that we'll be in that stage, and we will see if it is safe to let the organization continue its activities, or we have to wait a little. Very premature in that stages, and a lot of time we don't know. So we have to analyze with the organization itself what is it more dangerous to now continue, or it's the risk is smaller. We can allow the company to pursue his recovery efforts, and this is, like we said, private and regulator working together. Of course, we don't rely on self-reporting. This is the information gathering and the intelligence we will seek in order to not only receive the reports, we will find out that a company was under attack, and we will go to that company. Of course, that cooperation with the regulator means that because our goal is not sanctions. We don't want to indict, we don't want to sanction. we want that all sectors will be compliant to law and regulation. So sometimes if the company cooperated, reported, not sometimes, this is a major factor in our administrative judgment. If a company cooperated and mitigated the damages, we will accompany the compliance procedure and we'll make sure that the company is better off after the attack than the day the attack started, even though it didn't comply fully to law and regulations. So
yeah. So I mean, the assumption here, I think, is not if a company is going to be attacked, by perhaps when. And therefore, I actually want to ask Rahab, from your experience, when speaking about protecting your organization from a ransomware attack, what do you actually need to do here and now? What are the best practices?
So you don't need to be the first one in the herd, like to be the leader of everything, but you don't want to be also the last one in it. That will be the most easy attack. We are all focusing on AI and ML and digital wallets and digital coins, but sometimes we're forgetting the basics. So basic cyber hygiene, EDRs, awareness, following even patches installation. Go and make sure that you follow the needed cyber hygiene in order to make sure that your organization is protected. Then take care of all of the new challenging arenas as well.
I just want to add to that it's not nice to have. This is the law, and this is how you have to be compliant, because cyber hygiene is like the regulation of the minimum required. So yes, we don't want to make attacker's life easier. So at least do that.
Yeah. Pamela, to conclude perhaps this part, any tips from your experience about what happens when you pay ransomware, about cases? What actually happens after that?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely, number one, you want to definitely verify whether or not the group is sanctioned. If you have any ties to U.S., whether you're in the financial sector and you're using some type of a U.S. financial product, that can impact your business if you do make a payment to a sanctioned entity. But before you actually make the payment, you want to do what you can to try and identify the strain, because that's most likely what is going to tell you whether or not they're sanctioned. The actual payment address is going to be useless until you pay, because it's going to be a freshly generated crypto address, so we're not going to be able to get any intel off of that. In the case of Bitcoin, for example, they're going to generate a new address. Those aren't actually active on the blockchain until they have received their first transaction. So we're not going to get any data from the payment address that the victim received. But if you can identify the strain, then we can go back and look at prior payments to that strain. So if you identify, for example, that it's Lockbit, we can look at post or pre-Lockbit payments and see where those funds have gone to, so that we can help you identify whether or not you might be at risk for a sanctions violation, or what type of movements we should expect once you make the payment. You also want to have a recovery firm or a blockchain analytics by. All the recovery firms utilize some type of a blockchain analytics tool so that they are able to trace that payment. So you want to be able to track and trace, because if it does go into an exchange, and again, your operators probably won't take their little 15 to 20% cut to an exchange, but the actual boots on the actual door knockers they have less OPSEC, right? They're the guys that you hear about whenever law enforcement takes down ransomware group. They're the ones you hear about, and they had a lime green Lamborghini that was confiscated or something, right? They don't have good OPSEC. They're not as patient about sitting on their money, and so they do like to cash out pretty quick. So those are usually the funds you'll see go to an exchange. But you can't freeze the funds at an exchange unless you know when it hits that exchange, because as soon as they hit that exchange, they're going to swap it, or they're going to take it out of the exchange and move it to another exchange. So you have to act really quickly. So how do you with those contacts? If you can work with law enforcement, great, because law enforcement does have those contacts as well. but your recovery firm should also have those contacts too.
That's fascinating. We could pick a couple of questions from the audience if you have some. Yeah, please.
My question goes to Rafa. You spoke about different things you're encouraging. However, the U.S. 3 years ago said the Ransomware initiative. So that there might be, this is an opinion, I might be wrong, but I think we have a multiplicity of different forums and it's not going to help. How about if you just have where a majority of countries will do that, and then if they have to share anything about the ransomware, at least everyone will be aware of the challenge. The issue is if you have the Nordic one that you're talking about, or the Italian one, and then myself, this initiative that the US started, I might not be aware of these ransomware attacks that you're talking about. I don't know what's your view around that.
So you gave a great example of the counter-ransomware initiative that the US White House is leading, and I think that this subtopic will be discussed in the panel later on in this session. And Israel is, of course, very much involved in this activity. Yes, there are different forums and different activities. At some point in time, where there will be some sort of standard or a treaty, that a cyber treaty and a ransomware-related treaty that many countries will sign, then yes, there could be, I believe, could be such a forum. But we are in a period in time that these different initiatives are still needed because you're creating different engagements with different counterparts, and eventually these, bi-direct channels that you have between countries, organizations, people are the ones that are needed when you're facing any threat or challenge that you want to get the help of your counterparts in, to share information to them, and so on. So I believe that at this point in time, these various forms are needed, and I believe that it will continue with different forms as well. But it will take time to create that sort of much more stronger global engagement.
Yeah.
I'm not for the finance industry, but what is the goal eventually by tracing the money? What is the main step?
Do you want that?
Yeah, I mean, we seize it, right? That's ultimately the goal. You seize it or you disrupt the organization. If you can't get to the funds, if the funds have already been moved out of the exchange, you can still identify whose name was on that exchange account. And if it's an account, if it's an exchange that doesn't have KYC, know your customer, and they don't identify their users, we can still look at the other activity from that account and build out a profile of that individual and look at where else they've taken their funds. So you trace it. And eventually they're going to cash it out somewhere. They might not cash all of it out, but they're going to cash some. You still need cash to buy that lime green Lamborghini, right? So where did they take that? What exchange did they finally cash out at? And if we can't recover the funds for the victims, at least we can disrupt that particular network, right? So we can take the operators out. We take out the guys who are actually executing. So we can take out the different pieces of that ransomware as a service. And that's the end goal, really. Recovering funds is a benefit, but it doesn't happen very often. In the case of the Colonial Pipeline, where the FBI recovered some of the funds from the dark side, I love the FBI, they're great guys, but it wasn't because they were super sleuths. It was because that we actually worked with another government in another country that was able to see servers where that private key was sitting. Nobody broke the encryption, nobody did anything super amazing, except we got lucky that another government seized those servers and we were able to recover that. The way, if you read carefully the way the warrant's written to recover those Bitcoin, you can kind of read between the lines on why that happened. That's not typical. So if you work for an organization and you do pay your ransom, it's not typical that you're going to get the funds recovered. What we're really looking for at the end of the day is a criminal case operators who actually carried it out, right? If you get your money back, that's a benefit. Yeah.
Hi, Luis Navarra from Mexico, and we run a company. We protect customers, and we've seen like many ransomware attacks, not in the region, in Latin America. But sometimes it's not like these very well organized criminal groups. We've seen a lot of, like probably script kiddies, wherever. This ransomware service has democratized, in some way. So how do you deal with this? Like, if it's not a very well organized or sophisticated criminal organization that you can actually trace, how do you deal with this? Like from a regulatory standpoint, or what are the challenges there?
Actually, I could take that, my previous role. Actually, those that are not well organized are easier to catch because they're not sophisticated enough. In order to launder the funds on a fully transparent blockchain, you need to have a very good capabilities to do that. And usually, if you are not a large enough or sophisticated enough organization, you'll make many mistakes and you'll just leave some steps behind, and then it's easier to follow you. Not always it's also possible to confiscate the funds because once you get there many times it will be out. And also, I think that panel touched upon it very briefly, but if you don't have the keys for the wallet, you may end up like in a dead end. And we know about certain criminals that during a plea bargain gave up the string. But it's also interesting to mention that law enforcement are now being directed to, when they're doing the search in the crime scene and the houses and everything of criminals, to actually go and look for those weird word, a series of words or strings and anything that could at the end of the day be the password to access the wallet. Otherwise, if you remembers that or had the chance to transfer that to someone or tell someone where the password is located, you could have the suspect arrested, but then the money will fly out. So that is a major, major challenge to confiscate and seize the funds. Back there, yes.
Hi, it's Delilah at Skill. I'm wondering with the recent crypto crash and sort of how legitimate users are now using cryptocurrencies less, I'm wondering if it's becoming easy to track cyber criminals that are using cryptocurrencies because they're becoming sort of the main characters using those tokens.
Just in the term of volume, you mean, in the volume of their flows?
I just mean in terms of the crypto crash wouldn't affect cybercrime because they demand ransom in dollar payments, but they receive the transfers in Bitcoin. The concern for them, the reason why they use it is because it's, I guess, less traceable, not untraceable, but more anonymous, more if you have the right skills and tools to be able to evade detection. Now I'm wondering if now the legitimate users are sort of backing out of using crypto, if it's becoming easier to trace or not.
No, it's not. I wouldn't say it's easier. And the usership of crypto continues to grow year over year. So we continue to see a lot of just general growth, whether that's moving into other cryptos or moving into stable coins or different types of utilities in the DeFi space. But I would say we did see a trend where they did move into Monero for a while. And some of them will still request it in Monero. It's usually harder for the victim to get their hands on Monero, so not all victims can pay in Monero. If you're not familiar with Monero, it's a privacy coin or an anonymity enhanced coin, if you want to go by that terminology. But the challenge with Monero too is the liquidity on the end. A lot of exchanges, well-known exchanges we all know, and some countries have banned privacy coins. So can they actually swap that out at the end? But really it comes more to the user. Can the user actually get their hands on Monero to pay it? It's hard. And if you have a Monero wallet or you've downloaded and utilized, it's not as easy and not as readily available as just going out and get Bitcoin, right? So some ransomware groups will charge an upcharge, a surcharge to using Bitcoin because then they're going to use that extra Bitcoin to launder because it costs money to launder. It's not cheap, right? I mean, we all know in the traditional money laundering world, 20% on average, 15 to 20% is what's acceptable losses for laundering your funds. It's about the same in the crypto world. So you got to get that money back if you want to come out ahead. But no, I mean, we did see in 2022, right, a decrease in ransomware attacks. I don't know how much of that's related to the crypto winter, but you know, in March, seeing a spike again leads me to believe that I don't think the price of crypto affected them too much.
Thank you so much. We're out of time, so we'll have to conclude the panel. Thank you so much for the panelists, and enjoy the rest of the day. And I would like to invite Dr. Chaim Asa, the director of SimLab at Yuval Ne'eman Workshop, to introduce cyber ransomware war game. Thank you so much.
כולם הולכים. טוב.
Friends, we have one more talk, and then we're going on break. So if you can please stay seated until we're done. Could everyone please take their seats so we can conclude the first session of the ransomware event before we go on break? Thank you.
נתחיל? לא. הלו.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, we're not done yet.
I'll wait 1 minute. So, okay, I'll start. Excuse me for my Palestinian English, it's a little broken, but you will understand. Ask, if you have question, ask it in Hebrew, please. I don't understand English. So we ran, last week, we ran a war game, a cyber ransomware war game. Shut the door. Okay. It was an event of the Cyber Week, and in some minutes I'll try to tell you about the scenario, how it's, what was the end state of this scenario, and some conclusions. Main conclusion. It will be very short, so it will be okay. So the scenario was, first of all, it's very important. It was in December. December, you know, in Europe is very cold. I'm not saying it without any intentions. So December, a cyber ransomware attack paralyzed operations of the Israeli Emirati pipeline operator. The name of this operator is Mid-Eastream, that operated the oil pipeline transporting oil from the Gulf to Europe via Israel. Okay? The attack was a ransomware attack. Infected a control station in Israel and disrupts the pipeline operations at the Mid-Eastream team and in the Mid-Eastream, let's say, station in Israel. The team of the Mid-Eastream started to try to understand what happened and to deal with this problem. The attacker asked $4 million for stopping the event, but if they will not be paid in 24 hours, they will multiply the number every 24 hours. That means after 24 hours it will be 8 million, 16 million, 32 million, so it's small money. It's small money for the Emirates, even for Israel. But this is the point, because it's a small amount. It means that it was not a robbery, it was a political one. You understand what I'm saying? Due to the disruptions, the Emirati and the Israeli governments, mainly the national cyber authorities, forms experts team to manage the event, as usual. In the first stage, it was something like 24 hours. It was seemed that the attackers are Emirati. However, in the second stage, in another hour, it was quite clear that the attack was carried out by Iranian Ministry of Intelligence, MOIS 1. You know this ministry. So in that, and after some reaction of the US and Israel and all others, Russia, and I'll show you in a minute, this was the end of the game, and the end state of the game was as following. First of all, the US team was led by very, very known US president named Eitan Ben Eliyahu. It was a joke. They interpreted that this ransomware attack is very, very severe. It's not, by the way, it's a very severe event, and the US decided to react against Iran, even the US evaluated that Russia is in contact with Iran in this event. They decided to attack Iran, but only by cyber. So this is, it will be a very critical conclusion. If you have a cyber event attack, you are reacting by cyber no more. This is one of our main conclusions. Questions afterwards. They also understood that there is no need to deal with the ransom, as I said before, because the attacking type, $4 million, is nothing for the Emirates. This attacking type is leading to the conclusion that this event is political and not a robbery event. And this also is leading that Russia is involved. China, however, decided to be neutral and friendly to all sides, as usual. They are always friendly to everyone. Russia, can someone guess what they said? It's very interesting. They tried to blame Ukraine as the attacker. You know, everyone with these diseases. Russia is offering help to Europe instead of the broken pipeline. Israel is a friendly state in the eyes of Russia. So the US attacked the Iranian quality targets by cyber attack, only cyber attack, but very severe. They attacked the nuclear sites, all the nuclear sites. the military sites, energy sites, and economic and government centers, cyber attack, severe one, heavy one, the heaviest they could. The reaction of the Iranians was attacking the US sites in the Middle and Center East, in Iraq, and so on, Saudi, and so on. Also, it's very interesting, the cyber attack. So this is the end. So the limits was cyber attacking, no more than that, no bombs, no airplanes, no missiles, nothing, just cyber. So the main conclusion, one of them, the most important one, is I talked about it in the last 2 minutes. First of all, an extreme reaction is needed due to the Iranian cyber attack, but this reaction must not go over the limits of cyber. So the reaction to cyber is cyber, but very strong. No more than that. This is a very, I think, interesting conclusion. There is another one, still a dilemma. We don't have a solution to this dilemma. And this dilemma is that the dilemma about the procedure of paying or not paying the ransom by the company in the first stages. Because you know, $4 million, it's nothing. To pay or not. You can pay it and don't tell anyone. As you know, Israeli companies, they are linked to the government. They must not pay. It's a law. It's a dilemma. Because if they will pay, they can finish this event in minutes, maybe. Who knows? And as we know, there's a chain of problems afterwards with other attacks, and I don't want to to talk too much about it because maybe you understand it. If you are paying, and they are saying, I'm paying until 4 million. Every ransom less than 4 million, you can pay. Then there will be many attacks in 3. The ransom will be 3.9 million bucks, many of them. So we cannot stop it. This was the main, let's say, reason for don't pay. But I don't know. We didn't get a final solution for that. Also, there was some, let's say, requirements, like redundancy is needed in sites similar to Mid-Eastern in Israel. Also to isolate Iran from, and disintegrate Iran from the SWIFT. A small punishment. It's some punishment. Finishing?
No. I maybe later a question.
In Hebrew, please. I don't understand English. טוב, בסדר. I think I finished. There are some other conclusions, but the main conclusion I talked about, and this was the war game. Thank you. לא, רוצה לשאול in English.
In Hebrew or English?
In Yiddish.
It's not principal.
English, it's okay, yeah.
I have next dilemma. What do you think about KGB tool of name WhatsApp? You know, WhatsApp it's KGB tool. It's digital set crime.
Yeah. I think I have a very In the הפסקה, you know what's הפסקה? And we talk to you. Yeah, we'll talk about it. Not now. Other questions? Thank you, bye.
Thank you, everyone. So we're breaking until 5:05, and then we're starting back again with the second and third panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Dear guests, distinguished panelists. Today we're privileged to convene two esteemed panels to address the pressing issue of combating ransomware kill chain. Ransomware is one of few cyber-related risks which pose clear and present danger to Western economy. Based on criminal corporate business model, the products and services which enable and facilitate ransomware attacks are being supplied and deployed by proficiency-focused groups, specializing in the facilitation of access to exploited networks, deployment of malicious tools, exfiltration of valuable data, communicating with victims, and laundering illicit proceeds. During the last couple of years, the Counter-Ransomware Initiative, the CRI, a group of countries led by the White House, has been engaging multiple challenges which are associated with different angles of ransomware. Methodologies, best practices, and frameworks in areas such as reporting incidents, incident response, cyber insurance, and regulation, seizing and confiscating virtual assets, information sharing, and advanced solution to collaboration and malware repositories. The ransomware kill chain model behind us is a CRI interim output of a trilateral collaboration between the Netherlands, Germany, and the United States, which conceptualizes the threat sequence for disruptive, investigative, security, and strategic purposes. The two panels this evening aim to uncover valuable insights and collaborative approaches to disrupt the malicious operations of threat actors and groups from two viewpoints. The first panel will be focused on risk assessment and concentrating on the right link in the kill chain. The second panel will be focused on actual engagement by law enforcement and cybersecurity agencies. We succeeded in gathering a unique, diverse, and esteemed group of professionals from trusted private sector cybersecurity and cyber intelligence partners to threat intelligence analysts and law enforcement officers. We are grateful, truly grateful, to have this group of colleagues and friends with us today. So without further ado, please allow our first panelist and guest to introduce themselves. Maybe we should start with Dudi.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Good afternoon. Dudi, David Katz, the head of the Israeli Police National Cybercrime Unit in Lab 433.
Good afternoon, everyone. John Fokker, Head of Threat Intelligence for Trellix.
Hi, everybody. Mike DeBolt, Intel 471. I'm the Chief Intel Officer.
Hi, Gossam, Europol VC3, Head of Cyber Intelligence.
Just move next to you.
So, without further ado, let's jump into the first question. And the first question is regarding the absolutely essential role of the cyber intelligence and cybersecurity industries play in the targeting process and the use of actionable intelligence in focusing on high-value targets. How does each of you perceive the industry's part in the focusing and targeting processes, and is there a secret sauce for a successful partnership in targeting the ransomware kill chain? Maybe we'd start with John.
A secret sauce or a silver bullet, right? Well, I think the most things that we do is always hard work and a lot of elbow grease and making it work. From the private sector, I think we're in a unique position that you often see either you protect against it, so you have a lot of visibility in the attack surface. Where law enforcement often struggles is, and I don't know if the gentleman here can attest to that, is the reporting challenge. So there's a very large dark number of victims because there's not always an appetite to report. And at the same time, from an intelligence perspective, I work for Trellix. We're an XDR vendor, so we have endpoint appliances, endpoint protection. As well as that, we do threat intelligence, and we go into the underground and we map that, just like what Michael does with his team. What we do see is that there's commonalities. We see that there's a lot of places where threat actors meet, exchange knowledge, buy other services, and all these things. So there's a common denominator somewhere, like the initial access brokers you said. From us, it's very interesting to get a early glance in that landscape, either to identify victims that might be offered by an initial access broker so we can prevent anything worse, or get a better understanding of what communication channels they're using. And that allows us to focus our efforts on that and basically map out the underground or the actors committing ransomware, and sometimes link the actual malware to individual actors, because either they spoke about it or there's indicators in the malware that can tie them back to an individual.
Can I go now? All right. Yeah, and I don't have really much more to add to what John already said. I guess I would say that from my perspective, private sector can act as a force multiplier for law enforcement. In the ways that you just mentioned, John, about expertise, also access and visibility, we can be used, the private sector in general, but also specifically Trellix and Intel 471 can be used as a force multiplier to get into places that are very, very difficult, if not impossible to get into, because you have to have, the way that the cyber underground works, it's not like you can just walk into this place and expect to get, it's not the green easy button, give me all the intel. You have to have vetted access in a lot of these places. You have to be able to speak the language natively. And from me working, former law enforcement, federal law enforcement in the US, I didn't have those resources available to me, readily available. So the private sector can be a force multiplier in a lot of these avenues to get you the intel that you need so that you can take effective law enforcement action.
On the spectrum between raw data being accessed by law enforcement, your proprietary data, services that you give, and even shoulder-to-shoulder model of work, do you have a preferred mixture or preferred model that you can say this is the most effective way to collaborate with law enforcement and cybersecurity?
I don't know if and feel free to chime in. I don't know if there's a single effective methodology or single effective way. I would say that whatever way that you're using, it needs to be predicated on trust. Because if you don't have a trusting relationship between the public sector and the private sector, it's just it's going to be crap in, crap out, if you will. So whatever mode or methodology you're using to share that intel, it needs to be predicated on a trusting, established relationship between the private sector and the public sector.
And preferably a two-way street.
Yes. Yeah, it can't be a dark hole. That's for sure. Either way, right?
No, and often we analyze threats, we look at malware, we come across things, we might see indicators that are very helpful, and we can say like, hey, this is actually beaconing out to a command and control server that's based in a certain country that we have a friendly relationship with, or the cyber criminals leave something in the binary that we can attribute to somebody or someone. For us, it's very easy then to reach out to a friendly law enforcement partner, alert them, give a reporting, and that starts an investigation very often. And that's the very organic way of doing things. So there's no additional uplift. It's not that we're working for an authority or vice versa. It is very much in line what you then see. But the best success is when you then do provide the information is that back and forth. So we had a tremendous success, I think, with Operation Gold Dust, with Europol as well, where we provided some information on ReEvil, and we actually got some info back, and that luckily led to a lot of arrests and a lot of takedowns. Similar with Genesis Market, was also a big success, I might say so. And that's something that I think a lot of law enforcement agencies in the world are a bit shy, and that comes with that trust. So you would see that a lot of people in our position have a former law enforcement career, so you have a sort of trust. But I would really embrace a more robust sharing mechanism between public and private sector in this way. That's a two-way street. That you have like accredited private sector companies that are allowed under NDA to do additional research and all these things to align it with the public sector.
Goncalo and Dudi, both the INP and Europol has known extensively to have very good relationship with private sector and partnerships for their purposes. Could you enlighten us on your model of collaboration with the private sector?
Thank you, Gilad. Well, I tend to be positive, but also pragmatic and realistic. And I'm a believer, so I believe that, first of all, we, community, we are smarter, better, and more than criminals at the end. This is why at the end it's going to take time, but there are results. And we are under the umbrella of discussion of ransomware, and there are results. If you look back like 5-6 years ago, John already mentioned even one of the first like concrete mutual work among law enforcement and private sector. But John and Michael both touched already on the trust, and I think within the community, especially the InfoSec community, we tend to have all those discussions around frameworks, governance, regulation. Indeed, there is a need, and obviously we need to do it lawfully. But at the end of the day, what really matters is the club. And there is a club in this field. And this is really important to pass or to send that message out. There is trust on the table. John already mentioned a few operations, a few joint efforts. And recently also another one, which was done also with the private partners, the disruption against Cobalt Strike. John is also part of it. It's a huge slice, it's a huge outcome of what we have done together with the private partners. Looking again a bit back, in the past we had the operational meetings with our operational partners, different law enforcement agencies, not only obviously European law enforcement agencies. And that time was very difficult to have private partners on board. Nowadays we have even a kind of concept, we call it operational sprint, which is basically an operational meeting, which 4 or 5 days in a row, where we put teams together. But nowadays we have also private partners with us on a daily basis, well, not on a daily basis, but for that specific stream. So we have analysts coming from private partners, we have analysts also coming from law enforcement, we have cryptocurrency specialists also coming from private partners, and working together and going through the same data during 4 or 5 days in a row. And that's a boost. That's something that we do it nowadays, and it took some time to put everyone together. Because at the end, and John touched on this, and I think it's very important, and I'm speaking eventually against ourselves, which is the fact that typically law enforcement, we still are into that kind of legacy mode of always looking to the intel coming from private partners, but what is really actionable? What can we really do? We tend to bother our private partners, hey, what do you know about the specific threat group? What do you know about this specific malware family? But at the end of the day, do we have the resources to maximize that? Is it actionable from a law enforcement point of view? And I think this is why it's a game that we cannot really skip or move alone, because really doesn't work. All the recent operations that came to public are concrete examples of partnerships. More than ever, and just to conclude on my side on this specific point, we have the Joint Cyber Crime Task Force, well-known JCAT within EC3 at Europol, where we have cyber liaison officers from different agencies. And what we have also trying to achieve, it's not yet really in place, is we call it JCAT 2.0, which is having private partners embedded really on a permanent basis at Europol HQ together with us on a few operations. Instead of being a bit more ad hoc, per case, per intel development, it's really something that we want to achieve because it's really a must.
Well, in my point of view, the cooperation with the private sector is crucial, both in the tactical aspect and the strategical aspect. We all remember the attack on the Hillel Yaffe Hospital, which, criminally speaking, was dealt by my unit. And the tactical cooperation with the IR companies, I think, at least in my point of view, as Michael said, for law enforcement, you are very limited with your budget and with your resources, which the IR companies do not have to challenge these kind of problems. And it's completely a force multiplier when it comes to dealing with the crime scene. Now, if we take regular crimes such as robberies or murders, etc., we will always find partners there, such as the ambulance services or the firefighters, and we know how to cooperate with them. And what I've been doing in the last 2 years is trying to establish the same way of cooperation with the IR companies. Again, when we are speaking about the tactical aspect of the cooperation, because to be frank, they have much more capability to deal with these crime scenes than we as law enforcement have. There are some issues, for example, contaminating the crime scene, because when an IR company comes in, they are trying to, starting to check the computers and check the logs and to mess with the data, and it's important to have some very strict protocols between the law enforcement and the IR companies in terms of how to document every action that is being dealt on the crime scene. And I have to be frank that the one of the IR companies that was deployed in the Hillel Yaffe incident was able to provide us a very important piece of information that eventually allowed us to locate, seize, copy, and analyze the servers that were used by the attackers, which were very high-level attackers coming from a half-licensed position. And thanks to that, not only that we could have some valuable data, we could also prevent dozens of attacks all over Europe, cooperating with Europol in this regard. And this is one aspect of the cooperation. When it comes to strategical cooperation, you have to ask yourself, what is your goal in the end of the process? Do you wish to provide, to build some methodologies of prevention? Or as law enforcement, your DNA is to catch the bad guys and put them in jail. So do you want to get to the bad guys? And well, in my point of view, it's both. It's always both. And again, exchanging information between private sector and law enforcement will allow you, first of all, the ability to map the risks, to map the indicators in order to protect your country, to protect the victims. But second of all, get the investigations links in order to start and catch and adding the pieces of the puzzles. And in this regard, I think Europol has a very significant role, because the pieces of the puzzles will come from different law enforcement from different places in the world. But this cooperation, when it's monitored by a multilateral organization, I think will allow us also for the ability, in the end of the day, to catch the bad guys and not just to deal with the prevention of ransomware attacks.
Thank you, Dudi. These are, very good insights, both from a forensic perspective and from an intelligence perspective during the uncover parts of the operations. And always forensic data feeds the intelligence process and vice versa. And I totally agree with Juan Carlo about law enforcement and private sector sitting shoulder to shoulder as a very good, as a very effective type of models. We have some models around the world. We have the Cyber Fusion Center with Interpol. We have NCFTA in the States, and I think it's you get much better results when you actually brainstorm together the materials. Let's deep dive into the actionable kill chain intelligence in a bird's eye. Intel Fold 7.1 and Trellix are globally known and have absolutely substantial footprint in a prestigious group of security and intelligence vendors. Alternatively, law enforcement, cybersecurity, and privacy protection agencies have their own, sometimes proprietary, sources for valuable intel. How does valuable kill chain intelligence look like in the underground markets, active cyber defense system, illicit activity in relation to leaked data and stolen PIIs and virtual asset transactions. Private sector first.
Well, I will say, if we're talking about ransomware, ransomware is not magic. Okay, it doesn't just happen. You know, I think the media is great, so don't take this comment the wrong way, but the media does us a disservice because we don't really talk a whole lot about the precursors to ransomware, right? We all hear about the major breach victims that are a result of a successful ransomware attack, but we don't really look at what caused that ransomware attack. And so that's really our aim in the private sector. I would say generally, like between us, our two companies, we really try to understand what the threat is out there and what are the precursors to a successful ransomware attack. And once you understand that, by gaining the visibility that we can offer, that Trellix can offer, and there are other private sector firms that can offer this as well, then you can start tailoring your defenses that align to those precursor activities, whether they're internet-facing vulnerabilities, whether their credential theft is a huge problem still. How many people's password is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Don't raise your hands. Okay, good. But so focusing on to answer your question, using the private sector to focus on those precursors, and moving away from this reactive. Okay, now my understanding of the ransomware landscape is going to be shaped by what the media is saying. So looking at the truth of the situation, looking at the precursors is going to help us create a better defensive posture for your organization.
I totally agree with that. Ransomware has done a phenomenal job in marketing. I think the best. And we all fell for it. Everyone. And they're still doing it. So it's like everybody's talking about CLOP. They're mentioning it today. They do a phenomenal job at making sure that they're known, their name. But what they're doing is just an intrusion and it's just an extortion. You see the TTPs are overlapping across the groups. And for the longest time, everybody was focused on the name of the group or the head of the snake. Whereas these groups operate on a model, and when you have the ransomware as a service, it's very obvious, they operate on a model where you have other people actually doing the intrusion. So you have this tiered model. That model is now being challenged, and now you have groups that are working for themselves, and they will work with a brand name that has the best options. So it's becoming very murky now, and it's focusing only on the name. No, that's not going to solve the problem, because mind you, that name is that final piece de resistance, the coup de grace. That's that last piece of malware that is launching on your already breached network, and then you're already gone. Your opportunity as an organization to detect it lies before that. If you only trust your software to stop at 99% of the times, I have news for you. It's not going to work. There's no silver bullet. There's no silver answer. What it is defense in depth. You need to understand your network, and by having the intelligence and understanding how these threat actors operate, you can have better chances to detect them. And that goes not only from when they step foot in your network, but it goes also from what happens in the underground. What do they need to do in order to commit their crime? And I have to really give credit to law enforcement and to the framework and all that stuff to map out what is needed to commit crime and find those areas where they convey, where they come together. It could be like a VPN service. It could be a Jabber server. It could be it could be Cobalt Strike. What's the common denominator across attacks? And can we, private sector, help law enforcement combat or attack those common denominators? Can we have a bigger impact? And then we're always more than willing, because every customer of ours is being hammered by all these threats as well. So that's why we're, for instance, working with the Cobalt Strike team, because everybody was bothered by it. And we're like, hey, okay, we have intelligence. You guys want to work on stuff? Let's put our stuff together, and maybe we can put a stop to this. That's the way that we see that we can help out. But it's very reassuring, and like the panel before that we had on money, there's all these elements that cyber criminals use, all these services, in order to be successful. And if we can pinpoint those services and then target them by harnessing our powers together, then you can make a bigger impact. That goes beyond just the one attack. You're really attacking their own, kill chain or eco-climate or how you want to call it.
Yeah, and just to add really quick, because you mentioned coverage, so I want to drill into that just really quickly. once you establish coverage over this area, you'll realize, again, this is kind of breaking the mystique of ransomware, as the media would portray it. You realize that we're not dealing with an infinite number of threat actors here, with infinite, TTPs. We're dealing in a space that can be organized, that you can understand. And not only can you understand it, but you can track it. You can track the victims, obviously, because they're very loud. Ransomware actors are very loud, especially when it goes on name and shame blogs. But you can track their precursors. You can track their TTP. So it starts by adding coverage and understanding it that way.
Yeah. How do you see in well, obviously Europol have an extensive footprint in terms of data sets. You have EMAS, the European malware the repository, and you have the darknet internet, the darknet intelligence team. How do you see the kill chain intelligence in your systems?
Thanks, Gilad. Indeed, we have the privilege to be in the middle of all these games, which is a unique place. I can tell you that when it comes to cyber operations within the law enforcement domain, it's really a privilege, because at the end at Europol, as an agency, we play a different role. So we don't have our own cases, we don't have our own data, we play with the data and cases that are coming from the countries. So we are more, even being a law enforcement agency, we are more a criminal intelligence-led type of agency. And taking it specific from the last words from Michael, we have something, and we have someone in the house that calls these plates spaghetti and meatballs. Some of you already heard about this. John is already even laughing on it. But the concept and all the idea is exactly the same, because we really need to understand the criminal ecosystem and the entire attack life cycle. For example, if we move into the criminal services, enablers, facilitators, whatever you want to call it, for example, at Intel now is what we are doing. We are really focused now into develop parallel, medium, long-term operations that are going to fit the main case. And John was fully accurate on this. We cannot go into a ransomware, malware family A, B, and C. That doesn't work anymore, because from the moment that you start looking into this from an umbrella perspective, you will see the overlaps. You will see how criminal enterprise operates, and you see actors popping up in different ransomware business at the same time. So at Europol, we developed something more from an operational point of view. We call it International Ransomware Response Model, which is basically taking something very similar from what you see in the screen, but really going after high-value targets. We go after all the case and we try to identify the commonalities, not only at the distribution level, but also at the criminal services level. And to sum up, or to put it, or to illuminate a bit, because I didn't hear this part yet, but I would say a significant percentage of attribution made so far along these last years is being done on the financial side. And this is why operations or takedowns, or even with the consequent arrests like Bitslat early this year, so a shady crypto exchange, more recently a crypto mixer, chip mixer. This is where we can really enrich and feed the main case. You can't go directly. Everything starts in the police station with a complaint. Indeed, you need to act upon on, but at the end you really need to think big and not going case by case. And this is what we try to do, because we have the privilege to be in the middle, but again, we can't do this alone. Again, we don't even have data on our own side. Everything belongs to the countries, and not only the countries, because private partners are feeding also the countries. And I think also the last remark on this is, it's about the speed. The speed from the moment that we have a private party that manage to identify specific backend, we can really act fast if we do it together. We can really have the confliction among us, and not only have the confliction among law enforcement. That's really, really important.
Thank you. I really agree that you need to move from a variant-based intelligence or investigation into an infrastructure-based investigation. That's totally true. You're not trying to find the flavor of the month in this term, but focus on the meatballs, in the spaghetti and meatballs model. That's quite agreed. So our last question for that panel, because we're short on time, also relates to actionable threat intelligence. However, this time in relation to the way it is prioritized. We partly answer this in our references, but what are the essential components in the targeting prioritization process, with specific reference to session to essential components in the targeting prioritization processes, victimology, impact on critical infrastructure, essential services, leak data, PIIs, attribution and its expectancy, and other possible components. How do you focus on the most malicious type of infrastructures that you look?
Well, we already talked a little bit about sort of the interdependencies of how the cyber underground operates. So it's not just a lot of these actors, they don't operate in a vacuum, right? Even, ransomware affiliates and ransomware operators are using infrastructure that's rented out by another actor who just does rent infrastructure. They just do bulletproof hosting. So it's, once you get coverage over this space, and this is what we endeavor to do every single day, is we try to identify who are the most prolific actors in each one of those categories that are enabling the most cybercrime to happen within the entire ecosystem. And from a law enforcement perspective, and I don't want to talk for you guys, but mostly it's going to be based on what kind of impact those enabling services are having, financial impact to whatever countries you're supporting or whatever jurisdiction you're supporting. For us and our commercial and our public sector clients that we work with on a regular basis, it's about identifying who these actors are, profiling them, and then becoming so intimately familiar with them when they come into a forum or an instant messaging platform and they say something, we know whether it's credible or whether it's not, so that we can, when we pass that over to our commercial client or our public sector client, they can go, oh, this is something that we need to action right away, or it's something that maybe we need to just put on the back burner for now, we'll monitor it, we've got other priorities and other things to deal with. So that just gives you kind of a glimpse into how we sort of prioritize and the mentality around it.
Yeah. Obviously for us it's a slightly different, there's an overlap. We're a large vendor, so we have a lot of large customers. So if a customer of us gets hit, we get called in from either with an IR partner or ourselves, so they want to see what we have intelligence-wise to help them out. As well as that team that I work with, or the team that I run, does a lot of these more strategic initiatives. So you look at it more from a holistic view. But that doesn't take the fact away that if a large organization gets hit and their conveyor belt stops or whatever happens, we get called in and we'll just like roll up our sleeves and we'll go upstream sometimes, but try to find, because I have tremendous respect for both, like for the strategic stuff, but also like the boots on the ground, because both can give you a valuable intelligence. And for us, it's like if it's a major customer. Perfect anecdote, there is a large defense organization in South America. They are a customer, but a part of their infrastructure wasn't. That got hit by ransomware, and we got called in. We're doing analysis on the sample. We're doing all kinds of things to help them out. Actually, we're happy to say that there is a flaw in their encryption mechanism, so we can help decrypt the files. And inevitably, we were looking at where the ransomware group was having their extortion site. And we were able to figure out it was actually in my home country, in the Netherlands, so we made a couple of phone calls. But that stuff you don't figure out if you're doing a strategic initiative. That's the stuff that you figure out when you're actually being called on the spot and you just have to dig in. So both are very valuable, I think. And for us, prioritization, yeah, obviously if a customer has a large impact, we're the first ones to respond. And that's also, it could be ad hoc for one victim, but it could also be that there's a pattern. So for the longest time, there was a pattern with certain families, and for us, that gives us a lot of reassurance, like, hey, our customers are bothered by this. We talk, we're part of the advisory group at Europol. We talk to Europol, we talk to all kinds of institutions, and they say, well, these families or this type of threat is really bothering us. What do you know about it? And that gives us a prioritization from, okay, maybe we need to allocate some resources to better understand this threat. And then you could basically set up your investigation in a way to gain intelligence. So it could be either be like, okay, let's do a targeted approach that we're actually going to interact with people, that we're trying to build a relationship, or are we going to look better at their malware or infrastructure? But those are kind of the things that we do for prioritization. We often use the quadrant model. So we look at our customers, we look at what our industry peers are doing, we look at what our own researchers, because we have some really smart researchers as well, what we think is interesting, as well as that we talk to the public sector. And then you can see the quadrant is almost like a bingo chart. So if you have all 4 covered, then you know that's a threat you need to start covering.
Thank you. And NHTCU's quadrant is really, to my personal view, a worldwide model for prioritization. Thank you very much. Dudi, from the boots on the ground perspective, as a responsive unit for ransomware attacks, how do you see the most malicious, the most important incidents that you have to react to?
I think that one of the biggest problems, and I think it was described before, that 99% of the ransomware attack will not be reported to the police at all. The private sector usually will prefer to rely on an IR company in order to solve the problem, rather than to call the police, and the incident will be then published, and the reputation will be damaged, etc., etc. So we lack a lot of information coming from the police to the police. This information, of course, can be provided by IR companies, and there are all sorts of cooperation methods to work with IR companies. However, we do have, from the the boots on the ground perspective, no, in the end of the day, in one of the ransomware attacks that occurred here in Israel, we were able to see the server, and we found the 4 virtual machines that were used by the attacker. And once you have these virtual machines at your disposal, you learn not just the tools that were used, but also how, in terms of social engineering, how does he how he's trying to access to the computers of these victims. So it's a mixture of accessing the tools, accessing the social engineering tactics, and as I said before, I think that sharing this information is the key to the success, not just between private sector and local law enforcement, but also in perspective of multilateral cooperation with different law enforcement agencies.
Dear friends and colleagues, thank you very much. That was absolutely fascinating and insightful conversation, which I could personally extend for at least another 40 minutes. However, time is running out, and we must allow other colleagues to who already warm up on the sidelines and in the audience to take part in the second panel. Once again, we're absolutely grateful to your contribution to the panel. Thank you very much, and good evening. Thank you very much, Efrat, Natalie, Brett, Craig, Sophie. Thank you so much for coming. Dear guests and audience, for the first panel of the discourse referred to the intelligence and its impact, the second panel of our forum will focus on the engagement by law enforcement and cybersecurity agencies with different kill chain associated actors. Without further ado, please allow our first panel guests to introduce themselves.
Hi, Sophie Starik from the INCD. I'm in the TI department. I'm the team lead of eCrime.
Good afternoon. Craig Jones, Director of Cybercrime for Interpol, based in Singapore.
Good afternoon. My name is Brett Leatherman. I'm Chief of National Security for the FBI in the United States for cyber operations.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Natalie, and I'm Head of Operative International Liaison at the INCD.
Hello, everyone. I'm Efrat Sokolova-Klein. I'm a project manager in the Enforcement Department in the PPA, the Privacy Protection Authority.
Thank you all. Our first question is about choosing the right path for engagement. That's a tough one. And measuring its success. What are the different options for engagement against a ransomware kill chain, such as attack surface, victim mitigation, disruption of malicious infrastructures and threat actors, focus on criminal investigation? How are they prioritized again? For instance, should we opt to engage with lone threat actors using ransomware as a service, or to engage only with the widely impacted groups? How do we quantify, measure the success of these actions? Let us start with the most active law enforcement agency in the world in this sense.
Okay, there's a couple questions there. First, the FBI's role is to impose cost on nation state or criminal adversaries. So the FBI is both a criminal investigative agency as well as a national security agency within the United States. We are the primary domestic intelligence agency for the United States government. Under Presidential Policy Directive 41, the FBI is the lead cyber threat response agency for the U.S. government, which means our job is to pursue, investigate, and impose cost on those adversaries, and that includes ransomware actors. We prioritize our investigations based on impact to U.S. equities. So ransomware attacks that hit critical infrastructure, U.S. government agencies, or systems that have life safety impact are prioritized by the FBI and our partners at the Department of Homeland Security. And then beyond that, we cascade down to widespread impact to the financial system or financial equities of U.S. stakeholders. When it comes to victim organizations being hit with ransomware, we always encourage them to engage the FBI. We have an optic that not anybody else has. We have collection authority within the U.S., which allows us to provide threat intelligence to a victim company that is not available anywhere else. And so it's incumbent upon us as a law enforcement agency to share that and to help victims with that remediation work. We have 56 field offices throughout the United States. So it allows our agents, our analysts, and our computer scientists to surge to victim organizations when they're impacted and to help with that reconstitution mission as well. That answers maybe part of your question.
Yeah, quite a few, quite a big chunk of it. Craig, as you have the Cybercrime Directorate at Interpol has a unique viewpoint on the threat, having information coming both from law enforcement agencies and from private sector sitting next to you. How do you take that question, the different options for engagement, prioritization, and measurement?
Yeah, thanks, Gilad. So I'm in sort of my third position now in cyber. So previously I worked for a regional organised crime unit in the UK. We set up a brand new team, and we had to understand our role and remit first of all, and that was around prevention, prepare, pursue, and protect. So that was our role on a regional basis in the UK. Then went to National Crime Agency, National Cyber Crime Unit, and was then involved more on a national capability build. So I've gone from operational management to preparing capabilities, and then joined Interpol and Secondment 4 years ago. The idea of Interpol, it's an organisation that's over 100 years old, and I've asked people, what do Interpol do? My prior knowledge of Interpol was not that massive. I'm very, very honest. We worked in that European context into a European organisation and a European region. We worked with trusted countries that we were used to working with. Interpol is 195 member countries. We're a neutral organisation, so I don't work for any single country now. I just work for Interpol. And we're a mixture of seconded officials and we're a mixture of contract staff, but also we rely very heavily on our private partners, and the panel earlier, I think, demonstrated the need for law enforcement to engage. And this is around, law enforcement does not have that picture on a national basis. We have some very good partners on a national basis, but we don't see that global footprint. So as I said, with 195 countries, private partners from the US, Japan, Russia, we're able to bring that threat intel in. I didn't see those those threat feeds effectively when I was working on a national level. So what do we do with that? Well, we have no mandate to carry out an investigation. So first of all, I have to take my senior investigator's head off, and we then have to focus on high harm, high impact, high volume, and high interest crimes. But we then provide those data sets into the member countries because they're going to lead on those operations investigations, or the countries will come to us because part of our role is to help coordinate and support, and then provide the tools and platforms for the countries to then communicate. And we've been in some meetings earlier on today. We see that is really, really important that we can bring on the secure platforms, but also we can ensure that countries come on and start using those platforms. And the underlying part to all of this is those trusted communities. We work in a geopolitical space now. So one country will not speak to another country, or we'll have a bunch of countries will speak to a bunch of countries, but they won't then engage with others. Well, our role is unique in that space, is we should be the neutral. When those criminals are identified in one country and a country may not be able to work with them, we can then go directly into them, provide that information intelligence, bridge that gap between them effectively. And we do that greatly with the private partner data sets we get. So we bring those in, we become that aggregator. So again, I don't want to receive large data sets. You know, we don't have the rules in place to allow us to process those large data sets. But what we can do is aggregate that information. So those key identifiers that the panel was talking about earlier, we start aggregating some of those globally. That really gives us an insight. Then bringing in the law enforcement data sets, then being able to create that actual intelligence and provide that into those countries. And as we're doing in Africa at the moment, we're carrying out a Surge 2.0 operation with about 20 countries. We're helping train the countries first of all, but also we're providing them with operational activities that they can then do on there to either prevent, detect, investigate or disrupt cybercrime.
Thank you, Craig. Efrat, coming from the Privacy Protection Authority, I think one probably unique or one of two similar privacy protection authorities with investigative powers in the world. How do you prioritize? How do you decide on the right path, receiving information before incident and after incident in this respect?
Yeah, well, for us, as you said, we are very unique in the sense that we have both criminal and regulatory authorities, and not like many parallel PPAs in the world that don't have the criminal authorities. And I think that for us, the authority we have is only based on the databases, the digital databases. So the private information is what we are concerned with. I think most of the events of the ransomware are targeted to the databases that contain personal information. That's where most of the money gained is. And I think for us, the main issue is to see how the strategic way can combine with the tactical way. Right now in Israel, most of the ransom events are targeted in a tactical way, like Hillel Yaffe, that Dudi explained before, and the Technion. It focuses only on getting the organization back on its feet and to the main activity, and it doesn't take into account the strategic look. And I think that it should be based on both ends, both levels, both the strategic way and the tactical way. And for us not to focus only on returning the organization to activity as quickly as possible, but to extract from each event the information that will allow us to map the platforms used by the criminals, the IP addresses, the server domains, to think about the international connections that we can create in order to prevent these issues again.
Thank you, Rafat. Business continuity is certainly paramount in many cases and stands, well, at the first stages at least, above investigative, attributive, and mitigative components or considerations. Natalie, as head of international cooperation in the intelligence division at the INCD, and Sophie, as team leader in the cybercrime intelligence unit, how do you perceive and prioritize and choose the right paths in terms of response?
Maybe we should start with that.
So regarding response, this is mainly by a playbook that we have within the INCD in the defense division. And of course, the most important one is the critical infrastructure, and then we have the rest of the organization within the Israeli cybersphere. And at this point, I would also like to mention that once we identify organizations that are targeted both here and outside of Israel, that will allow us to make an international cooperation on this matter and extend the research and the investigation not only to the Israeli targets, but also to worldwide targets. And in this way, we are getting so much because we have more tools and knowledge and information, which make us make all this investigation much easier than just having one target.
Thank you. My answer actually resonates very much with John and Michael's answer from the previous session. And after seeing the things in the Israeli cyberspace, I can definitely sense that we should focus more on the initial access and the lateral movement stages of the ransomware cycle. Specifically, the info stealers. I think it's an important domain that we need to put more of our focus in, since this is actually the pre-ransomware event. Personally, to me, once we've reached the reality in which an organization is attacked by a ransomware, we've lost, in a sense. In today's culture, where bringing your own device and logging into your organization's network from your personal device is critical, because you're, as an organization, is more prone to being attacked and having your data leaked by info stealers. So I think we should focus our resources more in that domain. It will help us help the organizations prevent the ransomware events. That, in addition, of course, to cyber education, I think those two things should go together. And it obviously will save more money rather than cyber insurance, et cetera, and targeting-wise, I would say we should focus more on ransomware as a service providers. I don't think the affiliates are as much of a problem as the people who actually develop the code. And when you look at the big picture, you will see that most of the ransomware families today are based on the same code base, whether it be the Babook ransomware or the leaked Lockbit source code. The guys who developed it are the problem, not the affiliates. To me, snipping the snake's head at this point will be the most efficient. We can even see, like with big operations that we saw in media, such as Conti or Revo, they make impact. They have a psychological effect. I want to believe so, to the people who develop the ransomwares, that it's not cost effective, and we're gonna disrupt, and there are legal consequences to their actions, and using the cooperations with international agencies, we are able to provide results and hopefully help the cyberspace.
Thank you. These are wonderful insights. I totally agree from your perspective as a cyber analyst. Our second question is about enhancing agility in attack surface defense. What best practices, either from a law enforcement agency, a mitigating perspective, and cybersecurity, may help analysts in translating bulk data related to insight? You get a lot of information, a lot of raw data coming from private sector into active and actionable proactive recommendation with better chances to enhance target resilience. Maybe we should start with the cybersecurity intelligence part of the panel.
Thank you. Looking at bulk data is supposed to give you, of course, actionable items and deduce some trends. I can say that we in the INCD have conducted research of this sort, and we wanted to actually look at trends, let's say in the first 5 months of 2023, and to see what analytical insight and action items we can deduct from this. And we were actually able to find some interesting insights that can be translated into actionable items. We were able to point out things like the average shelf life of a CVE, which is used by e-crime groups, which is just like for good knowledge is like approximately 2 to 3 months. we were able to see re-emergence of CVEs. For example, one CVE was used in January and February, and then we saw a surge in May back again. I think data like this can tell us a lot about what the adversaries are looking at. In addition to looking at the affected products by those CVEs, a good example can be the Go Anywhere MFT CV that was used even by CLOP, and many organizations were targeted by it. And you can see trends. You can see what the adversaries are looking at, whether it be MFT services, whether it be end-of-life products like Microsoft Exchange servers from 2003, 2008. All this data is just lying around, and it's for us to draw insights. So, like, you know, a takeout from this is to, if like a CV about Go Anywhere is published, a reasonable task, a research to do is to trace similar products in the market and to keep eye on them, because essentially those affected products are the gate into a victim's network, and we should definitely focus our resources there.
One more word about what Sophie just said. When we shared those insights with our international partners, we found out that these trends are very similar with what they have seen. So it means that we all are having, maybe suffering from the same problems. And those trends are not only unique to the Israeli cybersphere, but of course it's globally. That's why the very instant conclusion is that we need to cooperate much more in order to deal with those problems. So CVEs and the other trend that Sophie just mentioned.
Brett and Craig, the FBI and Interpol are well known in their ability and their capacity to translate, to focus on specific targets from very big data sets. How do you see these practices in your day-to-day job, either from information coming from private sector or the proprietary data coming in the FBI cyber division data sets?
Yeah, so we get a lot of data. We have a lot of great private sector partners. A lot of our work is predicated on their threat intelligence, or it enhances our ongoing intelligence. And we bucket things in 4 ways. So the FBI, when we're looking at hitting back at an adversary, we're looking at offensive work against an actor or a group. We're looking at 4 real buckets, and that's where we take that data and we classify them in 4 different ways. We look at the actors or the criminal enterprises. We look at the infrastructure that they use. We look at the malware that they use. And then we look at the financials. And so if we can attack all 4 of those pillars, the more we're able to compromise from a law enforcement standpoint, the more likely we are to cripple them, to disable them, or to dismantle them. And our ultimate goal is to dismantle the organization, and where we can, bring the individuals to justice who engage in that activity. We've had a lot of success both dismantling through currency tracing. If you look at Colonial Pipeline, the pipeline attack that happened in the U.S. last year, 2 years ago, it seems like yesterday. So that was, the dark side ultimately attacked a critical infrastructure in the United States. The victim in that case made a ransom payment, and the FBI was able to seize those funds pursuant to a seizure warrant in the U.S. The other thing we do is we leverage our Rule 41 authorities in the United States to do extraterritorial technical operations where we can, to either seize or dismantle infrastructure, to seize malware samples, or to reclaim victim data where we can. And in some cases, if you look at the case of REvil, if you look at the case of the Hive ransomware group, we were able to provide decryptors to victim organizations using our law enforcement authorities. And so that is a has tremendous impact when victims in the US or around the world don't have to make those ransom payments. One thing we learned in the Hive ransom is that about 20% of victim organizations ultimately did not, or 20% of victim organizations reported to law enforcement, 80% of victim organizations did not report to law enforcement. So that shows there still is a significant delta in us getting the threat intel that we need to ultimately engage the bad actors.
I think that's a wider construct for law enforcement as well, is what is the role of law enforcement in this? You know, we are used to working in that local environment where we are just sit as one team, we work locally in the community, the crime's there. So law enforcement has to grapple with this model now, and that Interpol, you know, the last 8 years the program's been developed, it's not perfect yet, far from it. You know, you look at, when I hear someone say cybercrime is borderless, I just want to scream. It is totally bordered for law enforcement. You know, you can get some really good examples there. We have to look at countries and the different abilities countries have and make sure we can maximise those capabilities in countries, that countries can then work together to take proactive action. And coming back to that point around disruption is really, really key. So that's the one part about how we disrupt the cyber criminals. And then coming back to the Hive case, you know, we're looking at mitigation of scale here. How do we mitigate at scale? How do we automate that? How do we actually come into the systems and networks? And coming back to ransomware, but let's talk about, you know, a network intrusion takes place first of all. You know, it's that movement within there, and the exploitation is far beyond that. But we coin these terms ransomware, and everyone's, oh, ransomware is really, really bad. But actually, when you break it down into the component parts and try and look at it as a business model and how we disrupt that business model, we do it on a national basis, we do it on a regional basis. But where is that space internationally where we can truly impact? And coming back to 80% and not reported, that is so true. You know, we do not see that. The private sector see a lot of these data sets, and again, their job is to do what they do in the private sector, and they are now coming to that table. And this is about creating communities to protect communities. This is around that law enforcement model that we all come from the community, and our role is to protect those communities. And I'll just sort of give a shout out to the US new cyber strategy they put in there. A real shift. It's the first time I've seen that globally, where a country has said, actually, is it right we put the onus on an individual within this space to protect themselves? Because quite clearly often they can't, because they don't have the technical skills. Do we put that on the small companies as well? No, we don't. So trying to shift that awareness side, but also layer it above and do that blanket layer above. Now, some people could say, well, that's, you know, infringing on our rights and things like that. But, you know, as society, we've got a role to protect our communities. And that's, you know, a wider piece for law enforcement, but also for the private sector as well.
That's astonishing, because the points you just mentioned are, well, two of the points are specifically the points that we struggle with right now in our cyber strategy that is being under work. First, the role of law enforcement in a mitigating process within their local jurisdiction. The state taking responsibility for the SMBs and the commoner. And the second one is mitigation in scales, which must have a legal framework. Not all of the countries are capable to do it, especially not law enforcement agencies, the ones which doesn't have the homeland security capacity, as in Israel. So these are very good points. Because we're running out of time, our last question is regarding international cooperation. Given the heterogeneous landscape of countries and agencies in terms of cybersecurity and law enforcement capacities, this is something that we just touched and referred to. What short and long-term insight may be in relation to enhancing cross-jurisdiction, cyber resilience, and cooperation in law enforcement and threat actor-related activities? Maybe we should start with Natalie and then work our way to Efrat and the law enforcement.
So I would start, you know, Gilad, today we started our day at the GCC, where we showed the Crystal Ball platform, which is a collaboration and info sharing platform. So I would say that I think the very first thing we should do is creating a platform for all the international stakeholders relevant for the law enforcement to be able to share the information. So the first thing is that they will be able to share information, and for this we need a platform to do so. So maybe it's going to be Crystal Ball or another platform, but in order they will cooperate, they need some sort of mechanism to do so. So I think this is going to be a game changer in this domain.
Thank you.
Well, I think that in order to really deal with threat actors, we must collaborate internationally and inside the state itself, within the state actors, because we know the attackers don't operate from the state they attack at. So we have to collaborate and give our information, the things that we gather during an event, to other countries. And our ambition is, as an enforcement authority, is to take the information and share it with our partners. And we have to take into consideration the abilities and the powers that each entity has. Not everyone has, as we said before, the same abilities and authorities as others, and that has to be taken into consideration when deciding together on the right path to choose from.
Yeah, in addition to those online platforms, which are incredibly important, the FBI sees tremendous benefit in forward deploying agents overseas. And so right here in Tel Aviv, we have a cyber assistant legal attaché who's assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv, specifically with a cyber mission in mind. And so we've got to be able to action on objectives quickly when it comes to cyber, and having agents and law enforcement officers in country around the globe. You know, the adversaries are using global infrastructure. We have to be able to both freeze or seize that infrastructure or collect on that infrastructure quickly, and having folks in country working with foreign law enforcement is an important part of that. So we deploy agents around the globe in that endeavor.
Thank you, Brett.
And so I'll just cover off people, process, and technology. So following up the point there is around where do you put your resources, how do you collate your resources, how do you aggregate, how do you collaborate? So if we look at the Europol model, we have 27 countries there that work to harmonise laws, legislation, and they all pay money into a pot because they have to, and it works very, very well. They then have other countries working directly with them. So you have a group there working effectively. You then have countries that produce national strategies which are based on national interest, as they're going to protect their communities. How do we translate those national strategies into true global collaborative strategies? So coming back to about how you share information, 5 years ago, and you were part of this, it was like, law enforcement can't share information. How do we do it? So we now have two platforms. One's a knowledge exchange platform for non-operational information. It's a secure Interpol platform. The second one is a secure collaborative platform for operations. So when we do operations, we can put the data sets on there. As I said, in Africa at the moment, we've got 20 countries working on one operation. Now, they're the only ones that have access to that. But we can also bring private partners on there under our rules of processing data. We could bring national entities on there as well, so long as they're designated national entities by their National Central Bureau. But this is going to take 10, 15, 20 years. As I said, you started this well over 5 years ago, and we've only just deployed it now. So when we look at the speed of change and the scale of change on this, that's the time we're looking at. And just one final point, and I'm going to ask a question here. So, audience participation. How many people, and I asked this earlier, didn't I? How many people here are aware of the United Nations at the moment about the negotiations going on for a new crime convention? It's the first one over 20 years. Is anybody aware of that convention?
Ministry of Justice?
So
Anywhere?
Not many people. Last week, the United Nations, UNODC on their website, put out the zero draft text for a new international convention to elaborate on countering the use of information and communications technology for criminal purposes. Now, when you look in there, in the text, it either says ICT, Information Communication Technology, or cybercrime. That's going to be negotiated in New York, final session. Next year, on consensus basis, that will be signed off. So that will be outside of like the Budapest Convention. It will give a framework to all of the member countries of the United Nations. Now, I'm not going to second judge what that final convention is going to look like, but at least it then starts giving us a common language to work to. And part of Interpol's role there is to make sure we're the voice for law enforcement and make sure we represent the challenges that we have on a day-to-day basis working in this sort of bordered cybercrime environment.
That's absolutely true. INCD was called by the Ministry of Justice in Israel to have its remarks on the drafts of the convention. There were marathons just before the meetings in Vienna. Yeah, that's a very big piece of agreement, multilateral agreement between countries. It will be interesting to see how it corresponds with the Budapest Convention. Yeah. So, dear colleagues, at this point, it is time to complete this second panel and to conclude the Targeting the Ransomware Kill Chain Forum. It was an insightful event. Thank you for an amazing group of practitioners and experts from multiple disciplines. Once again, we're absolutely grateful to your contribution to the panel. Thank you and good evening.